Threat modeling becomes much easier to take seriously when you stop thinking of it as a fancy diagram exercise and start thinking of it as a disciplined way to ask, who might want to hurt us? Why would they bother? And what could they realistically do? Beginners often assume threats are generic, like hackers out there somewhere. But security decisions get sharper when you describe the likely adversaries in plain language and connect them to your specific environment. SecurityX includes threat modeling because it is one of the fastest ways to move from random security activity to targeted security improvement. If you know what you are protecting, who might attack it, and how they are likely to try, you can pick controls that match the threat instead of controls that just sound impressive. The subtitle of this episode matters because it focuses on the human side of threat modeling: actors, motivations, resources, and capabilities. Those four factors shape what attacks are plausible, what the attacker will prioritize, and how persistent they will be if they meet resistance. By the end, you should be able to look at a scenario and quickly build a realistic adversary picture that leads to sensible control choices. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Begin with the idea that a threat actor is not a stereotype, but a category of adversary defined by what they want and what they can do. Some actors want money, some want disruption, some want data, and some want influence. Some actors are external, like criminal groups, while others are internal, like disgruntled employees or careless insiders. Some actors are opportunistic, scanning the internet for easy targets, while others are targeted, choosing you because of who you are or what you do. Threat modeling is the practice of turning these differences into actionable assumptions. If you assume every adversary is equally capable, you will either overbuild controls and waste effort, or you will become so overwhelmed that you build nothing well. If you assume every adversary is weak, you will be surprised when a real attacker uses common techniques you did not plan for. A practical threat model aims for realistic adversaries, meaning extreme enough to matter, but plausible enough that planning is useful. SecurityX questions often reward answers that reflect that realism, such as choosing controls that match likely attacker behavior rather than imagining a purely technical vulnerability in isolation. Actors are the starting point, and for beginners it helps to think in terms of a few broad categories rather than dozens of niche labels. Cybercriminals are actors motivated primarily by profit, often using ransomware, credential theft, and fraud. Hacktivists are actors motivated by ideology and attention, often aiming for public disruption or data exposure to embarrass an organization. Nation-state actors are actors motivated by intelligence, geopolitical advantage, or long-term disruption, and they often have patience and resources that allow deeper campaigns. Insiders can be malicious or accidental, and they are dangerous because they may already have access and knowledge. Third-party actors can also become part of the threat landscape when vendors, partners, or contractors have access to systems or data, because their compromises can become your incident. The exam does not require you to label every group perfectly, but it does test whether you can recognize how actor type changes risk. For example, a financially motivated attacker may prioritize payment systems and customer accounts, while a disruption-motivated attacker may prioritize availability and public-facing services. Actor categories create a foundation for thinking about what matters most. Motivation is what turns an actor into a plan, because it tells you what the attacker is trying to achieve and therefore what they might do next. Profit-driven attackers often aim for outcomes like extortion, theft of financial data, or takeover of accounts for fraud. Their actions are shaped by speed and scale because they want to monetize efficiently, and they may move quickly to encrypt systems, exfiltrate data, or use stolen credentials. Ideology-driven attackers may aim for publicity, embarrassment, or disruption, and they may choose targets and timing that maximize attention. Intelligence-driven attackers often aim for quiet access, long-term persistence, and sensitive information that provides strategic advantage, and they may avoid loud attacks that trigger immediate response. Insider motivations can range from revenge to greed to convenience, And convenience is one of the biggest overlooked motivations because it drives risky behavior like bypassing controls, sharing passwords, or copying data into unapproved places. When you understand motivation, you can predict the attacker's behavior under pressure. For SecurityX scenarios, motivation helps you choose controls that interrupt the attacker's path to their goal, such as strong access controls for fraud risk, resilient recovery for extortion risk, or detection and anomaly monitoring for stealthy intelligence campaigns. Resources are the next factor because they influence what an attacker can sustain over time. Resources include money, time, access to tooling, access to infrastructure, and access to skilled people. An opportunistic attacker with limited resources may rely on publicly available exploits, password spraying, and social engineering templates, and they will often move on if the target is resistant. A well-resourced group can invest in reconnaissance, develop or acquire sophisticated tools, and maintain persistence over weeks or months. Resources also include the ability to absorb failure, meaning a resource-rich attacker can try many times, while a low-resource attacker may give up after a few blocked attempts. Beginners sometimes assume high resources means invincible, but resources still face constraints, and your goal is to make your environment expensive to attack, meaning it costs time and effort that may not be worth the payoff. SecurityX often tests this through questions about prioritization. You are expected to protect high-value assets in ways that raise the cost for attackers, especially those likely to invest effort. When you match your defenses to the adversary's resource level, you avoid wasting effort defending minor assets as if they were national secrets. Capabilities are closely related to resources, but they focus on what the attacker can actually do, not just what they can afford. Capabilities include technical skill, operational discipline, knowledge of your industry, ability to craft convincing social engineering, ability to exploit vulnerabilities, and ability to move laterally through environments. A low-capability attacker might rely on basic phishing and automated scanning, while a higher-capability attacker might use tailored pretexts, exploit chain techniques, and careful evasion to avoid detection. Capabilities also include understanding of how organizations respond, which allows attackers to time their actions and disguise them as normal behavior. Beginners sometimes think capabilities are purely technical, but social engineering capability can be more effective than deep exploit skill because it targets human decision-making and trust. SecurityX scenarios often involve credential compromise and user deception, and the correct answer frequently includes controls like multi-factor authentication, least privilege, and monitoring for unusual access patterns. These controls reduce the effectiveness of both low-capability and high-capability actors by limiting what a stolen credential can do and making suspicious activity more visible. When you bring actors, motivations, resources, and capabilities together, you can build a realistic threat profile that answers, what is the most likely path this attacker will take? For example, a profit-motivated criminal group with moderate resources might favor credential theft and ransomware because those techniques scale and have predictable payoffs. An insider with access but limited technical skill might copy data to personal storage, misuse reports, or share credentials with someone outside the organization. A sophisticated group with patience might aim for privileged access, then quietly collect sensitive data over time, avoiding loud disruptions. This kind of profile is powerful because it gives you a reason to choose one control over another. If the likely path involves credential compromise, identity protection becomes a priority. If the likely path involves third-party access, vendor controls and access boundaries become critical. If the likely path involves disruption, resilience, and recovery plans become more important. SecurityX questions often test whether you can choose controls that align to the threat path, not just controls that sound strong in general. A threat model that feels real produces choices that feel justified rather than random. A common beginner mistake is threat modeling in a vacuum, where you describe attackers but never connect them to assets and workflows. Threat modeling is not about writing a villain biography. It is about protecting something specific. So after you describe the actor, you connect them to what they value in your environment, such as customer accounts, payment flows, sensitive records, intellectual property, or service availability. Then you connect them to how they could reach that value, such as through user accounts, third-party integrations, exposed services, misconfigured permissions, or weak change control. This connection is where your threat model starts generating actionable controls. For example, if customer accounts are the target and phishing is plausible, you prioritize strong authentication and account monitoring. If sensitive records are the target and insiders are plausible, you prioritize least privilege, access reviews, and monitoring for abnormal exports. If availability is the target and public-facing services are involved, you prioritize resilience, rate-limiting concepts, and recovery planning. The exam will often present an asset and a threat scenario, and you are expected to connect the dots from actor to pathway to control in a way that addresses the likely risk. When you practice doing that, you stop seeing threat modeling as an extra step and start seeing it as the logic behind good security answers. Another trap is overestimating attackers and underestimating your own weak points, because beginners sometimes picture attackers as superhuman and therefore feel helpless. In reality, many successful attacks exploit simple weaknesses: reused passwords, missing patches, over-permissioned accounts, misconfigured storage, and slow detection. Threat modeling should therefore include the idea of attacker economics, meaning attackers choose paths that are cheap and effective. That is good news, because it means raising the cost of common paths can reduce risk significantly. Strong password practices and multi-factor authentication can block many credential-based attacks. Consistent patching reduces exposure to known exploits. Segmentation and least privilege reduce blast radius. Logging and monitoring reduce attacker dwell time by increasing the chance of detection. These are not glamorous, but they are powerful because they target common attacker behaviors. SecurityX often rewards answers that strengthen fundamentals, especially when the scenario describes an opportunistic or profit-driven attacker. If you choose a control that is complex but does not address the likely attacker path, it may be a distractor. Threat modeling like you mean it often leads you back to basics executed well. Threat modeling also includes thinking about what the attacker can see and what the attacker can learn, because many attacks begin with reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is the process of discovering what systems exist, what software is used, what people are in the organization, and what access paths might exist. An attacker with strong reconnaissance capability can craft more convincing pretexts and can target the most valuable vulnerabilities. For beginners, the key point is that reducing unnecessary exposure can reduce attacker options, such as limiting public information about internal systems, securing public-facing services, and ensuring that external interfaces do not reveal excessive detail through error messages or misconfigured endpoints. This is not about secrecy as a substitute for security, but about reducing easy intelligence that helps attackers move faster. SecurityX scenarios might mention an attacker finding an exposed development environment or discovering unprotected administrative panels, and the correct response often includes tightening exposure and monitoring for discovery patterns. When you incorporate reconnaissance into your threat model, you are more likely to prioritize controls that reduce attack surface and improve early detection, which can prevent the attacker from gaining momentum. A mature threat model also recognizes that different attackers respond differently to defenses, which affects your detection and response strategy. An opportunistic attacker may leave quickly if blocked by multi-factor authentication, while a determined attacker may pivot to another technique, such as targeting a weaker user, a vendor, or a misconfigured environment. That means defenses should be layered, so blocking one path does not leave a single alternative path wide open. It also means monitoring should focus on behaviors that indicate persistence, such as repeated login attempts, unusual privilege changes, and unexpected data access patterns. For beginners, the important point is that the threat model guides both prevention and detection. If your threat model includes insiders, you monitor for abnormal access by legitimate users. If your threat model includes ransomware, you monitor for unusual file activity and privilege changes. If your threat model includes supply chain compromise, you monitor changes in dependencies and unexpected behavior after updates. SecurityX questions often require this balance because they ask for best controls and best next steps, and those answers should reflect both blocking attacks and detecting them when blocking fails. Threat modeling helps you avoid choosing only one side of that equation. As we wrap up, threat modeling like you mean it is the practice of building realistic adversary pictures that lead to practical, Prioritize security decisions. Actors matter because different adversaries have different goals and different behaviors, so your defenses should match what is plausible for your context. Motivations matter because they predict what an attacker wants and how they will behave under resistance, whether they seek profit, disruption, intelligence, or simple convenience. Resources matter because they influence persistence and sophistication, shaping whether you should expect quick hits or long campaigns. Capabilities matter because they define what techniques are feasible, including both technical exploitation and human deception. When you connect these factors to the assets and workflows you care about, you can identify likely attack paths and choose controls that interrupt those paths, reduce blast radius, and improve detection. SecurityX rewards this mindset because it shows you can reason about threats with realism rather than fear or guesswork. When your threat model feels grounded, your security choices become clearer, your priorities become defensible, and the exam scenarios stop feeling like random puzzles and start feeling like solvable problems built from predictable patterns.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.